Okay, about today we are discussing about community-based disaster management approach. It involves the communities in what? In identifying, assessing what disaster risks and identifying to reduce the disaster risk. The usefulness of CBDRM approach helps in reducing disaster impacts. It helps to reduce the impact of the disasters, and so it has a greater recognition with in the disaster management approach. So community based disaster management, CBDM, community based disaster management, means involving the communities in identifying, assessing, and acting. What they have to identify, assess, and act jointly. Communities have to identify jointly to reduce what? Disaster risk. So it helps in reducing the disaster impacts. So it has a greater recognition within the disaster management framework. So it is very important in disaster reduction, risk reduction process. Then community includes not only the people who live in a certain location. Community means it includes not only the people who lives in a certain location, but also it includes what? The local government, local business sector, local academic bodies, and even the NGOs, non-governmental organization. But community, we don't what to say. My community means not only the people living in a certain location or a certain village, but it also includes, the community includes, in addition to people, it also includes local government, local business sector, local academic bodies, and the NGOs. So community based disaster management means involves the community in jointly in what process? In identifying, assessing, and assess, and acting jointly to reduce what? The disaster risks. So it is very important in the disaster reduction framework or disaster management framework. Then what do you mean by community? Community means, okay, certain people living in a certain village or certain locality. No, the community means not only the people living in a certain locality, but it also includes the local government, NGOs, local academic, business sectors, etc. That local, not only the people who living in a certain area, it also includes the local government, local academic bodies, local business sectors, and the NGO. So this is the first few statement about CBDM, community based disaster management process. It's very important. Then this term, the CBDM, received attention in the field during the 1980s in our development field in the 1980s. Then CBDM, it is commonly but the people's thinking is that it is the responsibility of grassroots organizations or the NGOs, but it is not right. Then two major aspects in this regard. What is it? whose responsibility is this? Firstly, the best practices of CBDM initiatives remain local initiatives and are not properly disseminated. Secondly, due to the lack of recognition of CBDM initiatives at the national level, there are often limited resources devoted to these activities. The proper dissemination is not here. Dissemination means the spreading. Spreading is not here. It remains such as the local level. The CBDM approach remains as the local level. Secondly, due to the lack of recognition at the national level, there are often limited resources devoted to these activities. Then CBDM is also not included in the national development policies. It is one of the major problem. But the CBDM is not involved in the national development policies. There is an increasing need to understand. So, as this is not included in the national development policies, it is an increasing need to understand the basics of CBDM, and we have to formulate a framework. We have to formulate a framework for what? For incorporating these CBDM into national policies with special focus on sustainability. There is a problem. The problem is that the CBDM approach is not recognized to a national level. So, for the CBDM, the resources are limited. So, the solution is that we have to incorporate this CBDM into national policies framework for its better recognition. Then only it can be successfully implemented. The CBDM approach can be successfully implemented at the national level. It has to be sustainable. As of now, it is remained in the local. Only local initiatives are there. We have to bring up the CBDM to a national level, so that we have to incorporate CBDM into the national policy network, national policy issues. We have to be especially focused on sustainability. So, in short, CBDM means community-based development, community-based disaster management, CBDM, community-based disaster management. It involves communities in identifying, assessing, and acting jointly to reduce disaster risk. Community means what? Not only certain people living in a certain area, no. Community also includes local government, these people, local business sector, and the NGOs. It is the people's responsibility to incorporate this CBDM to national policy issues with special focus on sustainability. CBDM is not only a responsibility of the grassroots organizations, but also our responsibility, the common people's responsibility. The problem is that it remains local, means the activities or the initiatives only remain local. It is not properly disseminated. Secondly, due to the lack of recognition at the national level, there are also limited resources devoted to these particular activities. So we have to formulate a framework for incorporating CBDM into national policy issues with special focus on sustainability. So this is CBDM. Then principles. Community-based disaster management principles. We have approximate 7 principles. First, planning, implementation and management owned by community, led by local champions. Local champions means local people. Planning, implementation and management owned by community, led by local champions. Interventions start from locally available resources. Locally available resource. We have to start from the locally available resources, capacities and partnership. Local champions. The initiatives have to be started at the local level. Then community consider the choice and take decisions. Developing local coping capacities. We have to focus on the local coping capacities. Then sustainability considered as an underlying factor. Sustainability has to be sustainable, and attention to special vulnerable groups. Attention to special vulnerable groups like women, children, old aged people, etc. Then deceased people having certain diseases. So they have to be come under the vulnerable group. So we have to give special attention to these vulnerable groups. People come under the vulnerable groups. So principles of CBDM means planning, implementation and management owned by community. Community means these people, local government, local business institutions, etc. That local level planning, implementation and management is very essential. Then interventions start from locally available resources, capacities and partnerships. If any disaster is there, we have to start from locally available resources first. Community considers choices and takes decisions. Programs focus on developing local coping capacities. We have to develop the local coping capacities first, and we have to implement programs based on that level, that local level, that capacity coping level at the local level. Disaster preparedness approach from a development perspective. We have to approach disaster preparedness from a development perspective. Then sustainability is very important. Then attention to special vulnerable groups. These principles are translated into implementation strategies for creating the desired impact. We have to, these are writing principles. We have to implement these principles. We have to implement implementation strategies for creating the desired impact on the ground. Each situation merits a unique solution with a combination of inputs. We have to combine these inputs in a particular way such that this disaster or the situation can be handled in a perfect manner.